This episode has been brought to you by the Raw Spirit Team. Building a business can be overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. We teach small and medium-sized businesses strategies for building a profitable, successful, stress-free business and life. Because guess what? You are more than your business. Through one-on-one training, online courses, and monthly guest experts, the Spirit Team is built on the principle of building each other up in business and in spirit. Try it for 14 days for free. Just head to rawconsulting.com and check out the Raw Spirit Team. Hey, it's Lauren here from the Raw podcast. Just a heads up that this conversation originally aired on Business in the Front, Party in the Back podcast. So on the episode today, I was joined by Courtney Deagon, and she is a pricing expert with a background in sales and marketing, and she studied psychology and accounting as well. Let me tell you this, if you are going to listen to any of the Raw podcast episodes, this needs to be in one of your must-hit lists. And the reason for this is why? It's because during this episode, Courtney impressed me so much. She answered every single question, even one on the power of numbers that I wasn't sure she was going to get. She just hit so many balls out of the park with this entire conversation. We talked about value pricing. We talked about how you should change if you're in a service-based industry, especially from an hourly rate. We talked about making sure that people have a perceived value of what you're giving them before you price things. Oh man, we talked about market research, quoting. We talked about the importance of adjusting your prices and more. It is all here. It is freaking awesome. I'm so excited for you. Get your pen, get your paper, get ready to learn because this episode's gonna save you money. Lauren with you here, and Michelle's leaving me to do all the work, which is just fine because I like to have the control, so that's no problem at all. I'm joined today by Courtney Deagon. She is a pricing expert with a background in sales and marketing, and she has studied psychology and accounting as well. So she's basically a major threat for anyone in business. Courtney is joining me on the show to talk about all things pricing. Now, she does help business owners establish a high perception of value. She teaches them how to price profitably, and she coaches business owners and leaders to have the confidence they need to have more powerful, profitable pricing. And with this episode all about pricing, we thought we'd bring in the big guns, and Courtney is here to talk to me today. Hello, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Wow, I'm going to have to live up to that huge introduction now. It's
No
great
pressure.
to be here. Yeah, no pressure, right?
Yeah, there's so much to go into. Pricing is such a huge subject, and it's such a funny thing because I think that a lot of pricing comes down to your feelings of self-worth, which we're going to get into later to see whether or not you agree. I love that you have a psychology background. That definitely would help you a lot with knowing how to basically probably even price things, but also to sell things and market things to people. So yeah, I'm really interested in the conversation. So let's get into it. Let's start first with what first drew you to sales and marketing. Did that come before the psychology?
That came just after the psychology. It was more, it was a job that I got at the time, and I didn't really know that I was really good at selling and really good at communicating value until I got a sales role, and I turned out to be really good at it. I've always been a words person. I'm a good communicator, and that came in handy in the sales job. I was also working for basically the world's biggest luxury brand, and they tend to, when you're a company that size and you're a luxury brand, you want to make sure your salespeople are really, really good at what they do. So we got trained all the time. So I was fortunate enough to have a lot of extensive training in sales as well, which gave me a lot of insight. And then being able to develop those relationships with customers taught me a lot about pricing without me even knowing that I was learning about it. So that was a really, really cool experience. The marketing side came after the sales side and was something I got into because I was still interested in business, but didn't really know what other aspects I wanted to go into. And so I delved into marketing a lot. It was a lot of reading, a lot of research, and it seemed to connect a lot to the psychology that I had studied previously as well. So that's where the sales and marketing came in.
Yeah, it's so funny because people need to be spoken to certain ways, certain keywords without getting those objections, all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff that you might have learned. Yeah, it's really cool. It's actually it's a nice background that you have to be able to, I don't know, I guess have a successful career in business, really. And then you, of course, throw in the numbers part of it,
Yeah.
because there's no such thing as having a business if you can't also maybe do the numbers, or at least
Exactly.
if you can't delegate someone else to do the numbers.
Yeah. I mean, even then, so originally when I started my business, I was bookkeeping. I wasn't doing pricing, and pricing was something that I did as a specialty. And I went into bookkeeping because I noticed that a lot of business owners, especially new, smaller, solo business owners, wanted to go into business, had a great idea, had a really great passion, but didn't really understand business. A lot of them hadn't worked in businesses before, didn't really understand how they worked. And I wanted to help them to understand the other financial aspects of it. So there's only one person that I still sort of help a little bit with their bookkeeping. And I stress to them all the time, if you're going to be a director of a company one day, you need to know these things. Like, yes, they're boring.
Yeah.
No one really wants to learn about it. It's not that, I mean, unless you are an accountant or a bookkeeper, then you might find it really interesting.
Yeah.
But as business owners, it's the non-sexy side, but it's so important. And it does touch pricing a little bit. It helps to have an understanding of how a business works, because then you can look at things like cost plus pricing or margins and things like that, and know where it's appropriate to use those kinds of strategies and where it's not appropriate. So.
Well, there's so many things that I want to go into this conversation. So I'm going to start off by basically talking about pricing your services or packages. Do you think that often relates to your relationship with money?
It can do. So a lot of the most common challenges that I get from people, or questions I get from people, is I want to charge more, but I don't know how, or I don't really feel like I can. I don't feel like it's right for me to do that. And so a lot of the time, even though this wasn't what I was expecting originally, a lot of the time I am very much coaching people in valuing themselves and getting over things like the self-doubt or the imposter syndrome, because a lot of the time it'll be a case of, oh, I can't charge that much because then I'll look greedy. I can't charge that much because then, I'll lose customers. So there's a lot of misunderstanding around pricing in general. And I think that we internalize things as we grow up. It can depend a lot on what kind of background you had growing up, whether you had a lot of money or a little bit of money, or sometimes that can affect it as well in terms of how you think about money in your business. It can also translate to things like, oh, I don't deserve to earn this much, or I don't feel okay being profitable when other people aren't being profitable, and things like that. So, but it's more about, I try to bring the focus away from themselves and bring the focus instead to, okay, but if you can be profitable, think about all the things you can do and the things you can achieve and all of the people that you can help. And so by helping people overcome those kind of internal challenges, the mindset issues, the self-doubt, they come to realize not only how valuable they are, but the way that they really impact people's lives, like not just now, but into the future. And then you can help them see the kind of the transformation that they're creating in their customers' lives. And that makes a huge difference then in how they see how they're pricing, because all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, I really should charge prices that feel fair for me, because I'm also giving something of value. It's not just me getting money, I'm giving something to someone.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Have you heard of the concept of value pricing?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Can we actually talk a little bit about that? Because
Absolutely.
value pricing is something that I was really, really keen on.
Mm-hmm.
And then I actually felt that it was a bit too difficult for me to actually do, even though I just think the concept itself is brilliant.
Yeah. So value pricing is something that I teach and encourage everyone to use. So value-based pricing is essentially charging what your customers are willing to pay. There's a few other definitions too that are a little bit different, but that's a really simple and easy one to go on. The reason it's so difficult, as you and me and everyone will know who's attempted value-based pricing, is because people's willingness to pay is hard to find out, and it changes. over time. And a lot of the time we know a lot about our product or service, but we don't know the value of our product or service. So that just makes it harder. A lot of the time people will make assumptions about what their customers value. And one thing that I do in any market research that I'm doing for someone is I'll ask them, what do you think is the thing your customers value most about working with you or about your product? And I'll get them to write down their response. Then I'll go and conduct the market research and ask their customers, what do you value most about working with this business or their product? And every single time, those two answers are different. And this has also happened for me where I've run surveys and I've said, what do you value most? And I've thought in my mind, oh, it's got to be this. And then they come back and they say, actually, it's this. This is what I value most. So when you actually take the time and make the effort to go out and find out what your customers really value about you, your product, working with you, then you can focus on, okay, how can I give more value to them? How can I communicate about it more effectively? How can I highlight it in my marketing? And then how can I capture more of my fair share of the value of that through really good, healthy pricing that makes sense for the customer as well?
Okay, so Courtney, that's really interesting that you answered that question that way. I love that you answered it that way. Can I also explain to you my interpretation of value pricing as well?
Sure.
So some of the learning that I was doing, and it was based on this podcast I listened to, which I'll put a link for that in the show notes, but essentially it was about figuring out how much value, AKA revenue, you are going to bring the person you're working with in the future, and then adjusting your price based on that. So if I talk to you, let's say I've been working in this in business for 15 years, okay? So if I give you my time, it doesn't make sense to charge you hourly. How can I charge you hourly for 15 years experience, right? But if I tell you something and all of a sudden you adjust the way you do business, and now you're not at a deficit, or now you're maybe increasing your revenue by $1,000 a month, that's $12,000 a year for however many years you're in business. Well, why would I charge you an hourly rate for that? I'm going to charge you 10% of your predicted revenue increase from that piece of knowledge. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, so that's one side. So that's something that we call economic value estimation, where we use a lot of variables to estimate the economic value, or basically the money, the return on investment that we're going to bring someone. So you can use it. It's very common, and it's much more easy in a B2B setting, right? So if you're working with a business, you can say, if we can increase your conversion by this much, what does that mean in terms of revenue? How much extra revenue you might get over the year, or next 10 years or something like that. So that definitely comes into it. And I like that you mentioned the 10% there, because a good rule of thumb is that the willingness to pay is usually 10% of the economic value estimation. The only downside there is it's very, very difficult to do in a B2C context, right? If you are a PT, for example, you can you could assume that you are going to bring economic benefits to someone because of an increased longevity of life, or, a decreased chance of having a heart attack in your 40s or 50s or 60s, right? That's going to save money. If you are not going to get cancer or diabetes, that's going to save money. But not only that, it's going to save time. It's going to mean that you're going to have more time with your family, more memories with your family. How do you put a price on that? So it becomes
you made me think of a hypnotherapist who stops somebody from smoking.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like $25 a day or whatever they charge.
Exactly. So another really good example is a book, right? So if I write a business book on pricing, and someone reads it, and then they all of a sudden they become $1 million business within 5 years, how do I charge $100,000 for that book? I can't. And so there's some places where value pricing might not make a lot of sense, and it just depends on your overall business strategy as well, in terms of what your other products and services are meant to be doing for your business price wise.
That's cool. Thank you for explaining it like that.
Yeah,
that was really great. And I think that's at the time what I was thinking is I was doing business consulting, and I was finding it difficult to do that kind of forecasting, I guess. And then I also didn't think that I was working with people who would really get it. that it,
Yeah.
because, it's kind of, is it sort of a common practice, or is it something?
Value-based pricing is, it's not that common yet. It's not as common as I would like it to be. Things like hourly rates and things are still very prevalent in the sorts of businesses that I see. A lot of people I come across have heard of value-based pricing and have thought about it, similar to you, have either thought about it or have tried to do it and just found that they couldn't get a handle on it, didn't really know how to do it. It is very difficult. And in business degrees and even in small business courses online and things, there isn't a lot of attention and detail given to pricing. So business owners end up missing out a lot on the kind of knowledge that they really need to have in order to price well. So it's not a surprise to me that value-based pricing isn't more common, but I'm working very hard to change that.
Yeah, I love it. But I mean, just speaking with you now for however long we've been talking, 10 minutes or something, you're proving the importance of this because of working with somebody like you, or at least having a really educated decision, making your decisions based on real facts,
Yeah.
or, like actual markups, not just, I think this is a good price, but like understanding that, you have to pay this amount to do this, and market it and all this kind of stuff. And I'm being super vague, but the point is that you need to put this work in to be able to actually have a return on investment.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the more that pricing is growing as a field, it's a relatively new field in and of itself. There aren't many of us pricing people. And even then, there are even fewer of us who are independent consultants or coaches like me. So as the field grows, it's a bit like change management. 10 or 15 years ago, basically nobody heard of change management. And now most people have. And so it's just one of those things that as it grows and becomes more prevalent, as more business owners learn about it and adopt it, I think value-based pricing will definitely become more common. We're seeing a very, very big shift in things like subscription-based pricing. Almost every business in the world is trying to do something subscription based, because that's the latest thing, and it is a very good business model. And so the insights around value-based pricing and subscriptions is really interesting as well.
Well, that's actually what I ended up doing because I couldn't figure out the value pricing. So then I decided that doing the one-on-one didn't make sense to me from a revenue perspective. I didn't want to make my clients feel like I needed their business to pay my mortgage, for example.
Sure.
So I started a subscription as well, but then I'm never able to charge what I actually think that it's worth because, but then when you look at volume, then it makes more sense if you have the volume. So anyway, I just want to say that was it. That was actually where it ended up going.
Okay.
So
Yeah, sure.
Makes sense.
Awesome.
So let's talk a bit for a minute about quoting, because you made me think there that, when you're kind of looking at pricing yourself, it's not just the hourly rate. It's not just the service that you're providing or the product that you're selling.
Yep.
It's also about what you are, predicted to do, right? AKA quoting. So I guess one of the examples that could be convenient for us to use for this would be workshops, because there are a lot of business professionals, a lot of service providers who might be asked to do workshops and they have to provide quotes for that. Do you have any advice or suggestions around how to properly quote for subjects like that?
The best general advice, so there's a couple of things going through my mind. The first one is to offer options. So when you offer options as opposed to just one price, you actually increase the chance of a buy by about 50%. Obviously, that's going to change industry to industry, size to size, and things like that. But in general, humans really, really love choice, right? Our brains love to feel like they're in control. We're in control of our own destiny. Right. If you give just one price, it feels like a bit of an imposition on you. Whereas if I give you 3 options, all of a sudden your brain is like, oh, I'm the one in control. I'm the one with the power. And by me giving you that, I also trigger the reciprocity effect a little bit, because you feel like I've given you something. And so you feel more inclined then to buy from me. The other thing too is that when you take the time and you find out more, through having something called a value conversation, you find out more about the people who've asked you to do the workshop, for example. you would ask them questions like, what kind of outcomes are you hoping that this will achieve? Why are you doing this now versus 6 months ago versus why not in 6 months' time? Asking them really, really good questions to find out what is it that's really driving them here? What are they really trying to achieve? And then, and this is something that I do and I teach my clients and members as well, is when you do up your proposal is to actually envelope all your pricing and packaging with those exact outcomes and benefits that the potential client talked about. So you would say something like, in our conversation, you mentioned that it was really important that this workshop not only have these features, but that it would have these results as well, or that you would meet these benchmarks, or that you would get this future outcome, for example. This is what we're going to work towards. So now you're not so focused on the price, you're focused on the fact that I asked you and I cared about what was important to you, and I remembered, and I wrote down, and I'm reiterating to you, I understand what's important to you, and this is what I'm going to aim for. I'm not just giving you options to sell you something. I'm actually really, really interested in, getting you the results that you want. So offering options, making sure that you're communicating, asking lots of questions, I always tell people to be insatiably curious about their clients. The other piece of advice I would give is to, if there are others who have given that workshop before or given that event or service before, I would go to them and ask them what they were paid. So there's an interesting example I had earlier in the year. I was asked to give an online keynote, and I didn't really know what to charge. So this happens to me sometimes as well, because this was a totally new group. I had never met them before, and I was just like, and I needed to come up with a price really quickly. And so I was like, oh, what do I do? And so I actually went to my mentor, Mark Stiving, who's a pricing expert, and he's been in pricing for like 1,000 years. He won't mind me saying that. and he said, let them know that your usual fee is X amount, but, to ask them what their budget is, and then to see if you can work within something like that. And he said, for the X amount, set it at like an industry standard, like a really good industry standard. And I wasn't sure about it, but I did it. And then when I asked them for their budget, they actually came back and they offered me a price that was about double what I would have originally quoted anyway. So it turned out to be a really, really good strategy. One of the techniques in there was anchoring. So when I originally said, oh, my normal fee for this is X amount, that X amount actually anchored them really, really high, and it creates what's known as a reference price. So that's like the first price that they see, and that's what they're kind of anchored to in their mind, and it influences the other numbers that they come up with. So it's a really cool psychological thing, that one.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, you're really showing your psychological background here. I love it. It's making me go, damn, I need to go take some courses. Yeah, it's really good. It's super interesting. You know what you made me think of when you were talking there, though, is that you said that they needed an answer right away, right? Or quickly. Do you agree, though, that it's important to make sure that you take a bit of time to process? Because I think sometimes when people want an answer right away, we can often give them the wrong number, and it could go either way. We quote it too high, or we could quote it too low.
It's always preferable to take time, definitely, to understand the customer, but there are going to be some times where you just need to give a quick response. And I would say that you shouldn't worry about quoting too high. You should worry about quoting too low, because that's what most people will do anyway. The good thing about quoting too high is to remember that your price actually tells a story. And so whenever you give a quote to somebody, you're basically telling them, this is what I charge, this is what other people pay me. And so even if that customer comes back and says, oh no, I'm sorry, that's too high for us, we can't afford you, I've at least told them a story with my pricing about the kind of quality that I give, the kind of value that I give them, the prices other people pay me. So, and a big part of that is being okay with no. I'm okay with losing business. Like I am okay with having a low conversion rate, because when I do get it, or even when I don't get it, the people who say no, they end up having a really high perceived value anyway. And then, later come back and say, I really want to work with you at that price that you gave me, and I can afford it now. So, but a lot of people will be afraid of that. They'll be afraid of the no. They'll say, I can just make it up in volume. I'll just take on like 10 clients a month and just work really, really hard and things, but you can end up being burnt out. You end up being less valuable if you're burnt out. People start to expect you to always work for those sort of lower or not great prices. So I always tell people, don't be afraid of quoting too high, because it's actually still doing a really positive thing in terms of your price branding and how people perceive your value.
I have like 5 questions about what you've just said.
Yeah,
so I just have
that's
to choose
okay.
one and then I'll go back to them.
That's right.
So in your experience, do you find that women are asked to do a lot of things for free?
Yes. Yes, definitely. It's
why the hell, girl? Tell me why.
I think it's a combination of things. I think number one, women are stereotypically nicer. We tend to say yes to a lot of things. We're brought up, depending on how you were raised, you might have seen your mum doing a lot more or all of the unpaid labor in the home, all of the child rearing, all of the housework and things like that. We're used to seeing women usually being the ones being really hospitable and cooking and bringing around meals and caring for the elderly parents and, caring for the kids and doing those sorts of things. So I think it's a cultural thing as well as a bit of a social thing as well. We're used to seeing it. The other thing too is that I think there's a bit of a pressure to do that as well. I'm in a lot of business forums where, I'll see a post by someone saying, oh, a friend has asked me to do something for free. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't even know if I want to charge her money. And there'll be a lot of comments from other women too saying like, yeah, I really struggle to charge, friends or family, or I really struggle to charge people who are on a pension or things like that. So I think there's still a little bit of guilt almost tied to earning money sometimes. I think it's also a case of, I need to do this for free so that I can get experience. So, I mean, the answer to your question is yes. The reasons are just, there's so many. It's a combination of a lot of different things.
Right. Okay. That was good. That was so good. In the Raw Raw podcast, I interview a friend, Claire Ness. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for our listener at home. And I loved our conversation because she was talking about how when you're asked to do something for free, when you do it for free, the client comes back and just assumes that you'll always do stuff for free.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things that I thought was really important to remember, because even if you are wanting experience, there should be an exchange of value on some level.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the other thing that she mentioned, which I thought was really good, is she always thinks about whether or not something is actually worth her time and would she rather be doing something else. And do you think that's kind of sometimes an indicator as to whether or not you should move forward with something?
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's certainly, of course, like, if a friend came to me and said, will you help me come and do some like house thing, help me do up their house or something, of course, I'm not going to charge them money for it. But I think it does come down to, how it makes you feel, how you feel about the relationship. And everyone has their own rules. Some people will never charge family. Some people will never charge friends or family. And that's okay, right? There's nothing wrong with that. So long as you are very strong in your boundaries, you can say yes to people. So, if I actually did have a friend whose business was struggling and I helped him for free for quite an extended period of time. But I was also very, very clear up front. And I said, this is what I'll do for you. And this is how much of my time that you'll be able to have, because I also need to I need to have really good pricing integrity and respect my other clients who are paying me, right?
Who are paying.
Yeah, exactly. But, that's who I am though. Like that's the rule I have for myself, is that if I have a friend who's a business owner and they're struggling, like I'm of course going to help them. But, if you decided that I don't want to do that, like that's okay too. You need to make that, but you need to make the decision and you need to make sure that you think through what your boundaries are going to be and be really upfront with them and communicate them really well. And don't be afraid to say no. Like it's okay to say no. If someone asks for something for free or, someone asks for help with something, if you don't want to do it or you can't do it, say no. It is okay. And you're not a bad person for saying no to someone.
Yeah, exactly. And chances are they'll find somebody else who can do it, which is also okay. One thing that you brought up earlier that I wanted to go into as well was I thought it was really important that you were talking about how even if you overquoted and they take a pass on your quote, let's say, they may come around again. And I'm just going to use this ridiculous example
Yeah.
because it's super easy and I'm sure many people can relate. I was looking for yoga pants online. Okay, now I think I was looking on Amazon or eBay. So there are all these yoga pants, but they were too cheap. I didn't want the super, super cheap ones. I wanted ones that I thought might not show my underwear line when I wear them, for example,
Yeah.
or might fit me like a normal person instead of a really small person, right? So I guess I'm just trying to show that in my own experience, that's me looking for something more expensive because I have a perceived, I believe that it's going to be a better quality. And so that's kind of what you're talking about is you're saying that, hey, your price is giving people this perceived, sort of what I'm
Perceived
forgetting the word.
value. Yeah.
Yes, the perceived value that you're worth more.
Yeah, exactly. And so because there's nothing in the human brain that can interpret something's value, right? There's nothing in our brain that can tell us, oh, that's worth this much. If I showed you a bottle of wine without a label on it, even if I got you to taste it and everything, and I asked you, how much is this worth? You would have no idea. I mean, even connoisseurs might say, this is an expensive wine or this is a cheap wine, but even they wouldn't be able to say this is worth exactly this much because it might be worth that much to you, but to someone who doesn't like wine, it's going to be worth zero, or it might even have a negative value, right? And so what our brain does is our brain actually relies on symbols and signals to tell us about the value of something. So I like to illustrate the concept of your price as a story, I like to use the car yard story, if I could share it with you for a moment. So imagine you walk into a car yard, right? And all the cars there for sale for like 40 grand, 50 grand. And you come across this car and it's got a sticker on the windshield that says $500. What's the first thing that goes through your mind?
It's broken.
Yeah, it's broken, it's crap, it's not going to work, it's not reliable, can't trust it. But you have never seen this car in your life. You've never driven it. You haven't talked to anyone who's driven it. You know nothing about this car. All your brain has done is seen a number, right? And all it's done is gone, oh my goodness, I've come up with this story in my mind about this car just by looking at a number. So that number there is a symbol, right? And so what our brain does is it compares things as well. And it goes, well, if all those other cars are $40,000, $50,000, and this is $500. It must not be that good. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so cheap. Okay. Now, your customers do the exact same thing to you in the marketplace. So they're going into the marketplace, they're looking at everyone else, they're looking at everyone else's prices, and they're looking at your prices. It just depends on what kind of story you want your pricing to be telling people. Would you rather it be saying, I am really high quality, I am worth this, I create really great value for people, this is how people value me? Or do you want people to go, oh, why is it so low? Like, have a little bit of doubt about maybe the quality that you're going to bring them, which can lead to more problems down the road.
Yeah, I love that. So I have a friend and she was doing a workshop in her area and she, I think, was charging something along the lines of $85. And then these other people came to town and they were doing a similar workshop. They were charging 45 and she didn't know what to do. And I was like, stick to your guns. There's always going to be people that are willing to pay more for, but she didn't do it. She didn't listen to me.
Oh no.
She dropped her price to 65. She dropped her price to 65. And it's like, okay. And it's funny because talking to her years later, she regrets doing that. But at the same time, you kind of get into this place of insecurity, I suppose, where you start to undermine yourself. You go back to what we were talking about at the top of the show, which was essentially, all these things that go into our mindset of whether or not we're worth it, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it is insecurity. And I think it's also just lack of knowledge, right? A lot of people have these assumptions that, cost plus pricing is how I need to price, or I need to charge per hour, or, what is it? Supply and demand, those sorts of things. Whereas sometimes that's not true. There's a lot of research to indicate that in some cases, when you increase the price of something, you increase the demand. So there was like a car wax that was specially designed for BMW or Mercedes or something like that. And I can't remember the name of it, but it's an excellent example. But they were selling it for like $4 or $5 per this little like container. And they were really struggling to get sales. And so what they did was they raised the price to like $30, right? Like a really, really huge increase. And their sales just skyrocketed. Right?
Right.
Whereas you would expect, according to economic theory of supply and demand, that, you know, when you increase the price, volume goes down. But in this case, the opposite happened. And it's funny because the same thing actually happened to me. I mean, I don't sell car wax or anything, but I was doing in-person workshops, you know, way back when we could do that. And workshops are very, very common in my area. But they tend to be very low price, like about $20, $30. And I came out and I think I did my first one at about 40 or 50. And I got a really good turnout. I sold out the workshop. And then for my next workshop, I raised the price by about $20 up to $65. And
yes, girl.
Yeah, and I sold out like 3 weeks before it. So, you know, not only did I increase the price and I still got people, I increased the price and I had more demand than for my former one. So, and I always like to tell that story because, you know, when I say to people, you know, what do you think about increasing your prices? And they'll say, no, I can't do that because I won't get customers. I can't do that because, you know, no one will buy from me. And then I always like to give them stories like that to show them that, no, it's not true. Like, it's not always the case that if you increase the price that you will decrease demand. It's just not all the time.
I love that. One of the things that I've been talking to Michelle about for ages is increasing her prices. And she finally did that. And one of the things that I do, you know, encourage people to do is, if you're a service provider, and I know if you agree, disagree, you'll let me know. You're free to do that. But if you're a service provider and you're too busy, increase your prices.
Yep. There's a podcast co-host, Ed Kless, whose favorite response to people saying, you know, I'm really busy, is just increase your prices. And I tell people to do that often as well. I'm like, if you are busy, that means your time is more valuable. Yeah. And that means that's one of the ways that you earn the right to increase your prices, is that if so many people are wanting to work with you, if you're providing so much value, you've earned the right to increase your price for sure. Definitely.
Yeah. One of the things that I struggle with myself is that I have an established sort of hourly rate. And I guess when people ask me to do work, I automatically default to that, depending on what it is, of course. But sometimes I feel embarrassed to explain what my hourly rate is. And I'd almost rather do it for free or not at all, just to avoid that subject. Do you notice other people deal with that too? Or my special case?
I go, no. This is so many people. And I mean, I could talk to you for 10 hours about the subject of hourly rate.
Yeah, I bet.
So I have spoken to a lot of different people and sort of helped people get out of charging hourly rates. I'm really, really not a fan. And there's several reasons why. And I've made blog posts on it. I've made a podcast and a video on it about some of the reasons why. There's a lot, but the main thing is that, you know, if your customers come to you, they really don't value your time. They don't care about your time. They care about the results that you can get for them. The price that they pay is going to be based on their willingness to pay. Right. And so if they're coming in and they think that they're paying for your time, their willingness to pay for that is around about here. So a lower amount, whereas their willingness to pay for the outcomes they want is a way up here. Right. So your time, you know, if I say to you, I'm going to spend an hour, you know, with you, that doesn't really tell you anything. It doesn't give you any sort of concrete knowledge to go off to say, this is what to expect, or this is what's going to happen if I spend an hour with Courtney. Whereas if I say to you, I'm going to spend an hour with you and I'm going to help you solve this exact problem, right? All of a sudden you've got a concrete piece of knowledge. You know, you can sort of imagine what impact that's going to have on your life, on your business, and you're going to have a much higher perceived value of that. You're going to have a higher willingness to pay for that as well. It's also very difficult, as you said before, you know, if you help someone, if you have an hour consult with somebody and they go off and they earn an extra 12 grand a year, how do you say to someone like, I charge $1,200 an hour? It's really, really hard to say to someone, I charge, you know, that much an hour, because people tie it to the hour. And because when we are going into a buying mode, the brain is very much on high alert. We really don't like losing money. We really don't like losing economically. And so we are already very, very sensitive about the things that we're paying for and what we're getting and what the level of risk is. And there's a lot of psychology and behavioral economics here, which is really fascinating, but that's a whole other concept as well. But, when you go into a conversation with someone saying, this is my hourly rate, they're only thinking about the price. Right? They're only going to be thinking about that. They're not thinking about the value. And so that's where value pricing comes in as a really great counter, because when you go to value-based pricing, both of your objectives are aligned for you and the customer. When you have an hourly rate, you're actually incentivized to work longer, whereas the client is going to want you to work less time so that it costs less money. But in value-based pricing, you want to increase the value you provide because you'll get paid more and you can make the client happy. And they want to increase the value that they get so that they get a better outcome. So now both of you are like on the same page. So it just, there's, as I said, I could talk about this a lot.
Awesome. Yeah. That was freaking awesome. You know why? It's so funny that you're bringing that up, because I actually had a client and she was stuck in this hourly rate thing because she was doing too much work for the amount that she'd sort of originally quoted, right? So then I recommended, because of the type of work she was in, to do packages. So it's like, hey, you want this outcome, you're going to get XYZ in this outcome for this amount, or you're going to get XYZ for this amount. But I wasn't thinking of doing that for some of the circumstances that I've been stuck with. So do you think that packages are a good way to go? It kind of goes back to your multiple offers, or, is that kind of how you suggest people kind of start getting out of the hourly rate situation?
I wouldn't. It depends on what they're selling. If they're selling services, definitely look at doing packages.
This example is service-based. Yeah.
Yep, service-based. Yep, got it. So definitely for service-based businesses, if they're wanting to get out of hourly rates, going to something like packages is a really good idea, and tie it to things like outcomes. So, and you can, as a first step, you can stick with pricing a set of like inclusions or features. So I might say to, I have a VA and social media manager, and I'll say to her, look, this is what I need each month. You let me know what you think is a fair price to pay. So she doesn't have like set packages for me or that. I let her know what I need, and then she lets me know how much she wants for it. But we have a really good relationship that way. And that's also another way that you can value price, is you can say to someone, this is what I need. Or if someone says to you, this is what I can do, what do you think is a fair price? And you have that conversation with them. But you do really need to have a really good relationship with the person. You need to trust them that, they're going to not rip you off. Yeah, they're going to deliver and things like that. So definitely going into something like packages, learning how to do packaging it's a pretty complex thing to do well. And it's something that takes a lot of testing. And the packages that you start with are not the packages you'll have forever. Like, you'll keep changing them as your customers change, as their needs change, as their perceived value changes over time. So don't be afraid to set up, a few packages. And like there's, as I said, there's a lot that goes into it, but, don't worry about it being perfect is the best advice that I would give. Don't worry about it being too perfect for now. Your customers will let you know what they value by which ones they pick. But basically, there's something in behavioral science called the magnetic middle. And so whenever you have like 3 options or multiple options, humans really don't like extremes because we're very risk averse, which we learned from prospect theory. We're very risk averse. We don't want to be too low. We don't want to be too high. We want to be somewhere in the middle because that's where it's safe. If I'm in the middle, I'm average. I'm still part of the group. I've got a better chance of survival. This goes back to, caveman days where if we got out of the cave, if we were thrown out of the cave, we got eaten by a lion, and that was just not good. And so we need to do whatever we could to make sure that we were always included and always safe, right? So that's why we're risk averse, and we're not just like going out hunting at nighttime so the lions can eat us. So, when you look at something like having options, oftentimes people will go for the magnetic middle, as we call it, because if I go for the low one, well, I might not get enough. It might not be good. If I go for the high one, I might get ripped off. Maybe they're just trying to rip me off. I'm going to go with the middle one. So most people will go for the middle package. So doing good, better, best packaging, where you have your really, really basic set in good, and then better is good plus a bit more. And that's the one that sort of most people would want / need. And then best is like your bells and whistles package. It's like better plus all these million extras, right? And so if you set up your packages that way, and you can set it up in such a way that you've got the very bare minimum that you are happy to do in your good package, in the better package, remembering that most people are going to want to choose that, put in the things that most people will want. And then in your best package is a really great way to tell a story about the kind of value, and transformation that you can offer to your clients. So if you put heaps and heaps of bells and whistles in there, it's your opportunity to say, this is what you could have from me, right? This is what I'm capable of. But I know that these two are going to be, more closer to your needs and more closer perhaps to your budget as well. And so people will feel safer then to choose the middle option.
Wow, girl, that is very good. I love that.
Thank you.
So how often should you adjust your pricing? Because you were kind of talking about how, maybe the packages you start with aren't the ones that you end with. We just heard the good, better, best, or I think that's, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, right. So how often should you be adjusting? Because also as we learn and read and practice, our skills are being refined. Like the hourly rate I was charging 10 years ago, I'm not charging that now.
Oh, no. Oh, gosh, I would be very, very concerned if you were.
So would I.
How often should you change your prices? Look, it's an impossible question to answer even generally, because it really, really depends. I do think that you should be checking in with your customers pretty regularly anyway, just to make sure that you're giving them what they need. If there's anything else that you can help them, be doing market research at least once a year, doing surveys and things, have like one-on-one conversations with your customers specifically to find out, hey, what do you think of this? How's this going? How can I improve? Asking really scary questions like, what's the worst thing about working with me? Or why might you stop working with me? Asking those questions is scary, but it's really, really important to do because that's when they will tell you things that will tell you what's really, really important to them. I might even tell you things that you should be aware of, but you might not be as well. So I think that if you set up your packages, certainly don't be afraid to change them, but just don't change them too often unless the prices aren't seen, right? If your prices aren't on your website, then it doesn't really matter how often you change them.
Right.
You might also do, something like grandfathering your pricing. So you might have your pricing for all your current customers, and then you might decide to increase your prices, but that price increase is only going to apply to new customers. Or you might have you might decide to test the willingness to pay of your customers, and maybe you don't have any prices on your website. So a lot of consultants do this. For like their projects and things like that, one-on-one with their clients. You'll get a client and you might charge them $5,000 and they say yes. And then the next client comes along and you charge them $7,000 and they say yes. And so you keep going up in little increments. And then as your conversion rate starts to come down a bit, once it hits maybe the 30 to 50% mark, that's where your target market's willingness to pay is, or that's your benchmark, right? Because willingness to pay is changing all the time and it's going to be different person to person. So you can never get the exact number, but you want to get as close as possible to that range of where the willingness to pay is.
I like what you're talking about at the very beginning as well, because you were kind of talking about making sure that you're clear on the outcomes or what your client needs. And so in a way, depending on how much they need you to deliver the outcome they're looking for, that could also affect, right, how you price things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if they, let's say it's like an emergency, right? If they, it's not often. So now and then I will get an inquiry from a startup company and they've done literally everything but market research. And they're ready to go. They're ready to launch. And they're like, hey, we're launching next week. We just don't have a price and we need a price right now. Now, setting a price on something is not just a matter of coming up with a number and putting it on.
Not?
No.
If anyone at home thinks that it is up to this point, you've missed it. Start again.
No. Please don't message me asking me that. No, it's so being really good at pricing, having the kind of pricing where it makes sense for your customers, they're happy to pay it because you're communicating value really well. That is not a quick fix, right? It's a process that it can take months, honestly. It can take months to get to know your customers well enough to start producing, developing the right kinds of products and services for your customers. So now and then I'll get an inquiry from a startup who, they've done lots of research for their product and they think it's a great idea and they think it's really valuable and they've already done their packaging and their branding and everything. And then they come to me and they go, okay, so now we just need a price. And I'm like, I could have helped you 6 months ago. I really can't help you in a week, because it's like if you went to a surgeon and you had a tumor in your head and you said, I need to know by the end of today whether this tumor is dangerous or not. And the surgeon's just going to look at you and be like, I can't tell you that. There's so many things that they need to know. They need to ask you a bunch of questions. They need to run tests. They need to maybe perform surgery. You know, there's so much that needs to happen. It's just not a quick process. And so the biggest thing I would stress with people is make sure you do that market research first. You know, talk to the people you're thinking of selling to and find out, what do you value? What do you like about these products from other companies? What do you not like? What do you wish you had? What do you wish they did for you? What kind of outcomes and benefits are you looking for? Because that is so, so important. And then trying to ask some willingness to pay questions as well is also a good idea.
Okay, I love that. So when you're doing your market research, you didn't really mention there looking at the prices of your competitors. Was that intentional, or is that something that you recommend people do as well?
I recommend that's just something everyone should do. It should act as a guardrail. So I think of competitor pricing and your costs as like guardrails on a road, right? So when you're driving down the road, the thing you look at the most tends to be the thing that you veer towards. You know, if you look this way too much, you're going to start veering that way. So your competitors' pricing and your own costs and things are kind of guardrails. They're things that you are aware of and you know about, but you don't focus on them per se. But yes, they're definitely still important to know. So all of in your market research, you know, you would still go out and see what your competitors are doing, how they're pricing, but don't just assume that their prices are what your prices should be, because you don't know what their overall business strategy is. They might have a completely different business model to you. They might have different distribution channels. They might, you know, have different future plans and goals and things. Like you just don't know why they've got that pricing.
Yeah, exactly. Or even if they've done the work, or if they've just picked a random number.
Exactly.
I was wondering about numbers. Do you pay attention at all to numerology or the meaning of numbers? Because I was told that a lot of people convert when you end with odd numbers. Primarily 7s and 3s are very highly sought after.
Threes is a new one. So sevens is very effective for e-commerce. I don't know about, you know, outside of e-commerce. 9 is very effective if you are selling something that is a really good deal or like a bargain price. We tend to associate 9s with something being a really good deal. So if you sell something that's, you know, really high ticket, high value, I really wouldn't put a 9 on the end of it. I would put a round number. Yeah. Okay. It all comes down to the fact that we are really, really poor subtractors. Our brains are efficient, but also at the same time a little bit lazy. So if you're looking at something, so let's say that you see a really, really nice dress for $500, and then you see on the price tag that it's been crossed out and it says $399. Your brain, because it's trying to save time, we're getting loaded with so much information all the time. It's only going to look at the 3 and it's going to be like, oh my gosh, it's $200 off. Right? Even though you know consciously that it's only $100 off, your brain is still going to tell you it's $200 off.
Wow.
It's not even gonna process the other 99 there. It's very, very effective. Whereas if it was 500 down to 400, your brain would be like, oh, it's only 100, right? So just by making it $399, I know.
That's my brain exploding, Courtney.
I know.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's pretty amazing, you know, how the brain works in that sort of thing. There's a lot of things like that. I mean, down to, so restaurants and cafes are normally very good at this. You'll notice sometimes they don't even have the dollar sign, or the font of the price is really, really tiny, or they won't have the .00. So the .00 is actually another symbol that the brain picks up. And whenever the brain looks at a number, it actually triggers a stress response in the brain, a bit of adrenaline, like, oh my gosh, this is something I'm going to lose. So whenever someone sees a price, you know, so this is why I don't like putting prices a lot on pages. Like when you've got, I don't know if you've seen those sales pages where it's like, this course is like $197, and then it's got the price all over the page. Every time you see a price, your brain is just like, this is what I'm going to lose. This is what I'm going to lose. Because we're so risk and loss averse.
Yes.
So focused on it. So yeah, there's so much there around the psychology of numbers for sure.
I freaking love that. And the whole time you were talking, I was thinking about Tom Hopkins. Have you ever looked at his stuff?
I don't think so. Remind me.
I'm going to send it to you, Courtney, after.
Okay.
He's a sales he's like a motivational sales guy, but he's from the 80s, 90s, I think. And he was one of the biggest selling sales, like in real estate, biggest selling sales guys in the States. But one of the things that he talks about is your word choice as well. So you don't say the cost, you say investment.
Investment, yes.
You don't say sign the contract, you say something like, I need you to authorize this. Or certain words that you say and don't say because our mind automatically puts up these objections. It just reminded me of that.
Yeah. So I'm doing a lot more reading and learning about like the linguistic side of pricing as well, and looking at like word choices and things like that. So one of the things I do with one of my clients is I'll go over her newsletter and I'll just take out any like cost language or any sort of like uncertainty language and things like that, and just make it very confident and make it very high value communication throughout the whole document. So yeah, it's a really cool thing.
Well, I'll send you that YouTube. It is so good. Awesome. And I'll put that for our listener at home in the show notes as well. Just before we end off here, because we're already up to our hour, what a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Are there any tips and tricks that you wanted to, or any just final comments that you wanted to mention that I maybe didn't ask you?
I think the main one is, I'd really love to encourage everyone to look into value-based pricing and to implement it. Because when you are doing anything else other than that, you could be leaving so much money on the table. Like, it's not funny, especially if you're using cost plus pricing. If you're charging $100 an hour, but your customers are actually willing to pay $200 an hour, you're losing double, every time. Right. Yeah. So you're losing so much money. So I really love to see businesses, especially small businesses and entrepreneurs, paid well for what they do. Entrepreneurs work really damn hard. Yeah. And so, if there's one thing that I can encourage people to do, it's adopt value-based pricing for sure.
I love that. Thank you so much. So listen, how can people get a hold of you? I'm sure there are people that are listening that are going, damn, this girl knows exactly what she's talking about. I want to know how to get a hold of you. You mentioned a membership earlier. Do you have a membership? Tell me about what you're up to. Yeah.
So I have a free group on Facebook called The Pricing on the Cake. It's a really popular group. We've got lots of funny memes and things on there. I share a lot of pricing insights and resources. I do have a membership as well where people can access me for an hour a week, and you can access any sort of videos, and I've got other content and goodies on there. And you can find information about that in my Facebook group, or my website is courtneydeagon.com. And if people want to reach out to me, I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, email. Reach out anytime. I love questions. I'll always answer emails that I get with questions. So yeah, if anyone wants to get in touch, I'm more than happy for them to do that.
That's awesome. And I'll put all your links as well in the show notes, so that's really easy for people to find you. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I have learned a lot, and I just think it's so awesome to see someone like you doing the work you do, because I agree with you that it is so important that if we're taking time away from our families, doing things that we want to do, that we're being paid adequately and compensated correctly for it.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for having me today, Lauren. It's been really fun.
It has been fun. Thank you. Hey, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please do leave us a review where you listen to your podcast and share it with your friends. New episodes every Monday.